Hi guys! So if you follow me on Instagram, then you know that I found these really beautiful pastel colored sprinkles and a layering pan set. And I decided to use them together to create a really fun, bright cake. So today I'm making one cake, but I'm decorating it two ways. You can make a simple occasion cake, and then there's also a more crazy cake, often called a zero gravity cake. Both are really easy to do, so let's get started. So I'm making a white cake recipe, and I need 6 egg whites at room temperature. So I'm using my fancy egg separator to do this and putting aside the egg yolks. An egg separator is really great, but sometimes it can take a little while to separate the egg yolk from the egg white, and if that's the case, I just use a fork and sort of pull it apart. And using only the egg whites is what will keep the cake white and not give it that yellow color. Now in a medium bowl, I'm adding 1 cup of milk at room temperature, my 6 egg whites, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, maybe a splash more because I really like vanilla. I didn't have clear vanilla, so I'm just using regular vanilla extract. And then I'm going to use a whisk and whisk it all together. In a large mixing bowl, I'm adding 2 1/4 cups of cake flour and using a whisk just to get any clumps out. Then I'm adding in 1 3/4 cups of sugar and whisking it together with my flour. Next, I'm adding 1 teaspoon of salt, whisking it up, then 4 teaspoons of baking powder, whisking it up. And finally, I'm adding in 1 1/2 sticks of unsalted butter at room temperature. Then I'm going to grab my hand mixer and mix it all together. Now I'm adding half of my wet ingredients to my dry ingredients, and I'm using my hand mixer to blend it all together. Once that's blended together, I'm going to add the remaining half of my wet ingredients, and I'm going to keep blending it all together until it's completely combined. So this is my very first time using these tiny little layering pans. They're much smaller than I thought they would be, but I'm just opening them up, washing them off, drying them, and then I'm going to grease them with Crisco and flour them. And I'm doing that to each pan. I don't care if something is nonstick or not, I always grease and flour my pans. I just do. That's just the way that I am. I want 1 layer of my cake to be white, so I'm filling 1 cake pan with my batter just as it is, and each pan holds about 3/4 of a cup of batter, and I still had enough left over to make 4 regular size cupcakes. So this white cake recipe is enough to make a 6-inch, 5-layered cake and then have a little extra left over as well. So my idea for this cake was to have each layer match the color of the sprinkles. So I got out my coloring pods and I picked out the colors that I could match best with minimal tweaking. So I'm using my gel colors and a toothpick to apply each of the colors to my batter. I always do a little bit at first and then I add more as needed with a fresh toothpick. Once the color is right, I pour the batter into the cake pan and then I repeat the process for the next color. I need a white layer, a pink layer, purple, green, and finally blue. Once all of my cake pans are filled, I'm giving each one a tap on the countertop to release any of the air bubbles. And then I'm just going to place them into the oven at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes or so. One cake needed a little bit longer to bake, and that's completely okay. It happens when you bake multiple ones at once. So I just took all the others out and I let the last one bake for another minute or 2 by itself. Now for the frosting. This is a simple buttercream frosting using unsalted butter, milk, and powdered sugar. The first thing I'm doing is I'm beating 4 sticks of room temperature butter until it's light and fluffy. I beat it for about 5 minutes. Then I'm going to start adding my powdered sugar. And I'm going to add at least 4 cups, maybe a little bit more. It depends on how stiff you need or want your frosting, depending on what you're doing with your cake. For this particular cake, the sides of my cake and the top of my cake, the frosting can be softer. But I do need some pretty stiff frosting for the peaks that are pink on the top of the cake. So once I frost the top and the sides of my cake with the white frosting, I'm going to add more powdered sugar to get the thicker consistency needed for piping the pink dollops. So now that all of my cakes are cooled, I'm going to place the purple one on a cake round, and then I'm going to check all of my other cakes. Basically, I want to decide what color goes where, and I want to make sure that all of the tops of my cakes are flat. If it's not flat, then I use a knife to cut the rounded part of the cake off. If the cake layers aren't flat and they're rounded, they'll slide around on you once you start to layer your cake, and we don't want that. We don't want a cake that's falling over. So you want to make sure that all of the tops of the cakes are nice and flat. Next, I'm adding a layer of frosting to my purple layer of cake, smoothing it out, making it as level as I can, and then I'm going to add the green layer of cake right on top, putting a layer of frosting on the green cake, smoothing it out, making it as level as possible, and then adding the next layer of cake. And I'm just going to repeat that process until I get all of my layers of cake all the way to the top. Once at the top of my cake, I'm adding a thin layer of frosting all over the top and down the sides of my cake. This thin layer of frosting is what's called a crumb coat, and it's going to seal in any of the crumbs so they don't get on the final layer of frosting. Once this thin layer is on my cake, I'm going to place it in the freezer for about 15 minutes so it can harden and stiffen up so that when I touch the frosting, it doesn't come off on my finger. If it still comes off on my finger, I'll leave it in the freezer a little bit longer. So my cake is out of the freezer and I'm adding my final layer of frosting. I'm scooping out the frosting and spinning my cake on I'm spinning my cake on the turntable as I cover the entire thing. I don't want any of the cake to be visible through the frosting. So I'm using my extra long spatula to smooth the sides and the top of the cake and give it a nice finished polished look. So while my cake has fresh frosting on it, meaning that the frosting is still sticky, I'm taking those sprinkles that I bought and I'm putting them in my hand and adding them to the bottom of my cake just by pressing them into the sides with my hand. And I'm just doing it gently, and I'm going to go all the way around the bottom of my cake. So for my crazy fun cake decoration, I'm using an extra wide straw and I'm covering it with frosting and sprinkles. Now some people use melted chocolate. Do whatever you want to do and use whatever you have on hand. You don't have to use melted chocolate. You don't have to use frosting. You could use one or the other. Or maybe there's something else out there that you could use to do this as well. But this, for me, was way easier than melting down chocolate, putting it on the straw, and then trying to put the sprinkles on it. So I used my frosting that I was using on my cake. It was way easier. Next, I did melt down some white chocolate and dye it purple, and then I drizzled it on my cake in 2 different shades of purple. Now, for the pink dollops around the top of my cake, I dyed some of my white frosting pink, and I used a Wilton Tip 4B to create those dollops all around the rim of the cake. So this is what the first decorated version of my cake looks like. It's simple, it's cute, and it's easy enough to do, and it's really perfect as any sort of special occasion cake. It's going to be really cute when you cut into it with all the different layers that match the colored sprinkles. But for me, I didn't want to stop here. I wanted to take it a step further. I really wanted to make the cake as a zero gravity cake. I had the vision in my head already of the sprinkles being poured onto the cake, and I just had to make that vision come to life. So I had to take it a step further and make it a zero gravity cake. But you could stop here and just let it be like a cute special occasion cake. So to make this a zero gravity cake, I'm adding the straw that we've covered in frosting and sprinkles, and I had it in the fridge so it could sort of harden up a little bit. And then I'm just going to push it through the top of the cake, and then I'm going to add some pink frosting where the straw and the top of the cake meet. So now I'm taking some of the sprinkles and I'm covering up all of that frosting that I just added where the straw and the cake meet. I'm going to cover all of that frosting with the sprinkles, and I'm basically just trying to make it look like the bag of sprinkles has been dumped onto the cake. Next, I'm adding a blob of frosting to the top of my straw so I can get my bag of sprinkles to stick to it. So at first I had a few too many sprinkles in the bag and it was a little bit too heavy and some of them were falling out. So I took some more of the sprinkles out, so I just had a few left in the bag, and then I flipped it over and pressed it into that frosting on the top of the straw until it stuck. And then I took any of the extra sprinkles and just covered up any of that pink frosting to make it look like all of the sprinkles were just being dumped onto the cake. So I still wanted a few of the sprinkles to be in the bag, so it looked like it was in the process of being dumped onto the cake, if that makes any sense. So that's it, guys. That's how I made my zero gravity cake. It was pretty easy to do and it turned out really, really cute. I hope you guys liked this video, and as always, thanks for watching.